joining. Like Heather mentioned, my name's Andrea Ewing. I am the manager of corporate connections here, working very closely with our corporate partners, supporting their corporate innovation efforts, as well as connecting partners, our clients into potential customers, and then also work as an advisor. So really excited to be working closely as Flary's lead advisor. I've been able to work with Sam now for a little over 6 months, and we've actually known each other for a long time, had the opportunity to meet Sam originally while I was on the organizing team of Startup Weekend, and we stayed in touch from there. When Sam became a client, it just naturally worked that I could become his advisor, and it's been an absolute pleasure working with him so far. So Sam is the CEO and founder of Fleri. Sam, do you want to introduce yourself and maybe take us into a little elevator pitch of who Fleri is?
Yeah, absolutely. And Andrea, thank you for that introduction. Like you rightly mentioned, we've known each other for a while. What people might not know is Fleri is the third business idea that I brought to Rev One, and they always say third time's the charm. So really excited to be working with you and then the rest of the team. I'm Sam Baddoo. Most people know me around Columbus. I'm originally from Ghana. Moved to the States about 6 years ago and moved to Columbus 5 years ago. Been a serial entrepreneur here, been a serial entrepreneur back in Ghana, where I'm originally from. And I currently lead the team at Fleri. What we do at Fleri is to bring peace of mind and financial security to immigrants living in the US and in the diaspora, coming originally from Africa, helping them to provide healthcare access to their families and their loved ones back home. The way we do this is through our partnerships with insurance carriers based internationally, both on the continent and then here in the States. And we partner with them to create products that then go to provide access to millions of people in Africa, sponsored by their families living in the diaspora.
Awesome. So, your journey has been really unique. Like you just mentioned, coming to the US 6 years ago, Columbus 5 years ago, and originally being from Ghana. Can you talk a little bit about your journey itself and kind of what led you to start Fleri? I feel like that is super personal, so would love to hear that.
Yeah, so starting Fleri there was an immediate push, and then there was also the culmination of all of my previous activities and all of the things that led to getting to this point. In the immediate side, when you look at it, the unfortunate experience last year, just about a year ago, my grandmother took ill very suddenly, and what might be unusual for most people was that, once she was referred to a bigger hospital, she made the unfortunate decision, which is financially motivated, around getting herbal medicine. This is popular in places like Ghana and other African countries as a way to save money. That ended up leading to her demise within a very short period. And for me, having a background and experience working with Cigna Global, that was a wake-up call to the fact that, my grandmother, who had 4 children living in the United States, 15 grandchildren, received money from every one of them, every few months, really didn't have a financial reason to not get healthcare, right? That wasn't the block. But it really came to how us as family could not manage her access to it, making it easier for her. And so this situation going through it, as unfortunate as it is, isn't unique. There are lots of people who reached out, share the same experiences around their own loss and dealing with family care from 8,000 miles away. And so that triggered the thoughts around, well, I'm over here selling insurance to expatriates who are traveling to live in the same places where our relatives live. Why is it not possible for our relatives to have access to care in such a simple way? And basically that started the work around that. leading to the partnerships, leading to where we are today with what we're doing in Ghana and Nigeria. The much longer vision for that and kind of how that has worked out was, my experiences growing up. I remember when I was 12 years old, um, we had this trip to go see the Mercy ships. The Mercy ships are popular in the United States now because during the coronavirus pandemic, they were dispatched to the coast to help with bringing care to people. But the Mercy ships are a fleet of 7 ships that travel around the world, usually bringing healthcare, volunteer doctors to places like Ghana, to places like Sierra Leone and other countries like that. Now, this 526-foot of ship was huge. We lined up hundreds of people trying to go see it. And for me, that was the first recognition of what aid and charity really looked like growing up. There were a bunch of white doctors who were spending their time, effort, not being paid, taking care of a group of people who lived in a foreign country where they had no relatives, right? And that was amazing. I grew up later on, ended up going to college in Morocco, had this really great Pan-African education on a UN scholarship, and became really interested in social entrepreneurship, right? And for me, then it became, how do we build sustainable businesses, commercially viable businesses that allow us to have social impact? So most of my life has been around that, and my career has been around that, leading to this point where it became, if access to care for people in emerging countries is the impact that I ultimately want to have, how do we build a solid business around it that is able to make money in a way that still drives the impact, but doesn't depend on charity to be able to do?
Yeah, that's so interesting, and thank you so much for sharing such a personal story. It's terrible to hear what happened to your grandma, and it's so hard to also hear that that isn't an anomaly, right? This is something that's happening all the time, and so for you to be tackling such a prominent problem that hits so closely to people's hearts and people's homes is really just exciting to be a part of. And I think it's really just incredible to see the traction that you've already gotten with this, kind of growing and building on that idea and how it really does resonate with so many people that it has such a unique value proposition, right? So it's relatively obvious in a lot of ways, showing that you're going to be able to better support loved ones through providing health insurance and making sure that they're cared for. Do you have any challenges as you're talking or speaking about this value proposition to potential customers? Are there any hesitations, or how are you kind of selling it? Are there any roadblocks in that at all?
Yeah, it's one thing to have an idea, right? It's another thing to build it, and it's an entirely different thing when it goes out to market. And the number one group of people, right, that I wake up being scared of every single day is our customers, right? These are who we call sponsors, people who are deciding to place an early bet, working with us. Um, and it's not just any product, it's trusting us with the care of a loved one, that every time they go to the hospital, things happen the way we say they will happen. That they don't go over there. And I can tell some stories about that. But to answer your question, there are roadblocks. The number one is just simply building trust, right?
Yeah.
There's so many stories and so many incidents of immigrants being scammed, right? Both locally over here, right? With social security fraud, immigration fraud, not being able to understand financial details properly because they weren't explained, jargon. You couple that with the fact that it's insurance, right? On a normal basis, we don't even understand our own insurance, let alone trying to figure out insurance 8,000 miles away for a relative that you're not seeing every single day, right? So building trust is the very first roadblock. And obviously, those early people who play trust on us are helping us to be able to talk to other people within their circles, right? The second thing that is a challenge is communicating the value proposition. Yes, it makes sense to be able to provide care, but everybody will tell you Trusting healthcare systems back in Africa isn't easy, right? You can pay for it, but what is the level or the quality of care? And trying to explain to people that we're starting a virtuous cycle, right? A cycle that starts with putting more resources directly into healthcare. And that is going to create more opportunities to bring on more healthcare workers, to be able to pay them better, to be able to attract more people to become nurses, right? But also getting more equipment. If they're better financed, it means that the care doesn't stop with just those who have relatives, but we start to see the effects with the entire health system, right? In a way that is beautiful and scalable, right? And so trying to communicate this value takes time, educating them about the products, about how the money flows, how the partnership flows, who do we hold responsible when something happens. That has been the major challenge at this point, trying to just get over the trust and verification for a lot of people with that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I also recall in one of our past conversations, something you had mentioned that I thought was really interesting was, how this problem is currently solved today in many ways and many times is just sending kind of finances and sending money back to the family to be able to self-serve in a lot of ways. But there's a lack of transparency there and insight into where that funding is actually going. Can you speak to that a little bit and that value add too?
Yeah, absolutely. So we start off from a point where we believe that for every dollar, there is a value that you're seeking, right? You do your budgeting every week, every month. We all figure out where our money is going to.
Right.
When I wake up to go pay my gas bill, I don't say, well, I'm going to send money to Western Union, right? And then Western Union is then going to send the money to the gas bill company, right? Or someone is going to pick that up and then go pay the gas bill. And in that value proposition, or in that chain of value, we lose value at every point, right? Because this middleman is going to take a little, this other one is going to take a little, and so many people have to eat in that process. Now, when it comes to remittances, right? Remittances have been growing consistently at a 10 to 20% rate over the last 10 years. Growing so significantly to the point that in 2019, there are only about 2.8 on record immigrants from Africa in the United States, right? Not counting the countless others who are undocumented.
Mm-hmm.
2.8 million people send $48 billion to a continent. That's huge,
Yeah.
especially when you talk about all of the aid and all of the development dollars that goes to Africa. The number of people who work in warehouses, work as doctors, professors, all of that send $48 billion to the continent. Think of what that does, right? Now, this money goes off relatively with very few questions to check. Take a transaction through WorldRemit or Western Union, right? They're going to ask you, what are you sending this money for? And you can say, I'm sending it to a relative, to a business, for a payment for a service, right? That's how minuscule the data we collect on where this is going. Now, when it gets back there, you have to deal with the person who has so many other priorities on their needs, right? On their needs list, so many other things to do. Well, there's church. There's the funeral of an uncle that I have to help contribute to, right? There's food that I have to buy. There's clothes, buying gas for a car, right? Where is healthcare, which isn't immediately visible unless there's an emergency, ranking in that? But at the same time, if you look at what the World Bank and then the UN finds out on the other side, where is the money being spent, right? We have over 25% of remittances going towards healthcare and healthcare emergencies in a very inefficient way. So on top of the 9 to 12% that you lose to Western Union, the other middlemen on the ground through the agencies, even worse if you use a bank, you now have to deal with this person trying to pay the local taxi, the person at the front, the person that they have to bribe to get to the front of the line in the hospital, all along that value chain, just so they can get the care. And then they're going to come right back to you when there's the review that they need to go to, the surgery that has to be scheduled, the pharmaceutical spend that they have to do, and you constantly keep sending money in this way.
Mhm.
Why can it not be like when I get up and just pay for my gas bill, right?
Right.
And so that value prop is really essential to this idea that we're the first to offer a direct remittance product, right? Focusing on health, but it applies in a lot of different ways. And what immigrants are waking up to is the fact that their money could be worth a lot more if they had control over where it was going and how it was being spent. And that's really what we're trying to build here.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for expanding on that. I mean, I think that that's just really unique, and there's so much complexity to it that is not obvious to those that aren't familiar with that problem. So that's really great context to have. The insurance industry itself is really challenging. It faces more governmental regulations and other restrictions than many other industries today. This can lead to a lot of challenges as well as opportunities. How do you kind of approach this space, working in this space, and viewing these challenges and opportunities on behalf of Fleri, especially with the international component of the work?
Yeah, you just said it right there, right? We started this sometime in March, right, of last year. The first, what, 8 months or so was all focused on trying to figure out how do we get through regulation, right? Navigating compliance and navigating all of the different laws that we had to deal with. And part of the way we deal with that is through partnerships. Partnerships in the local countries that we're in how we organize our own governance structure, right? And then locally, right, dealing with licenses, myself, the company, right, making sure that we are able to bring the product in a way that makes sense, but in a way that also fits regulation. And that has been a big part of what we have been doing, right? And so focusing on how we work with the insurers, the carriers, how we work with lawyers, right, both legal counsel and then our external legal partners, right, making sure that we're making those decisions in the same way. And then even most recently, how we look at funding, right? Not just looking at fundraising from a cash perspective, but also having partners bringing on local expertise, relationships, and understanding on the ground that help us to be able to scale compliance in this way. And so there are a lot of interesting things that we're having to figure out around the structure of our entities, right, to be able to get this to be as simple as possible for both sides of the equation.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I think that key point that you acknowledged too of bringing on the right advisors and the right funding, and there's so many pieces of the puzzle that can support you in a holistic way to make that journey a little bit easier. But it's definitely a huge hurdle. So it's exciting to see how far you've come with that already, and I'm sure that you're going to continue to find more and more partners that are only going to help you skyrocket that. But in that same kind of vein, thinking about the challenges with insurance and the complexities there, you're also expanding this internationally. So starting in one country, I believe Ghana was the first, just based on familiarity and some of the connections that you already had there. How are you planning and thinking about expanding this beyond just Ghana, to the whole of Africa or even beyond?
Yeah. So two interesting things that I'll note about this, right, is one, we're focused on building community and being driven by community, which
Mhm.
means that our starting point for deciding which countries that we're going in always starts with the African community that exists here, right? And there's also some data that we look to be able to figure this out. And so Nigeria made sense because it was going to be our biggest market, right? They're the biggest remittance market, largest economy. There's so much that's happening there that made sense. And
Great.
so when the opportunity came to be able to work with the carrier there, that fit into their plans, to fit into ours. It was really early, but it's never too early to start a relationship, right? And so we knew that this was going to have to scale in that way, and starting that relationship very early on was important. But the other thing that drives this is also looking at the huge opportunity, which is the African Continental Trade Agreement, right? The FTCA is going to be what shapes what trade in Africa, right? And what companies are going to be able to do in the next few years. For those who don't have familiarity with this, it's creating the largest economic bloc, right, that the world has seen, similar to what you would see the EU be, right? And it's funny that as Britain exited the EU bloc, Africa was getting ready to band together to increase trade in this way. But what that means for us is that we don't just now start to look at this as a diaspora Africa connection, but we also think of the fact that people are leaving places like Zimbabwe to go work in South Africa. And they still need to protect and care for their families in the same way. But
Right.
now the opportunity is expanding to look at the definition of who lives in the diaspora and who an expatriate is and who is caring for their family, really creating some opportunities for us to be able to drive this growth and how we decide on scaling.
Yeah, absolutely. Which then also just expands your probably approach to target customers and get in contact with customers and
Yeah.
complicates, but also just expands that work. So that's going to be a really interesting market opportunity as that continues to grow. So, a couple other areas that I wanted to touch on. First, speaking about all of this complexity, what were some of the things that you would wish you'd kind of known about before getting started? I mean, was there anything that you think back and you're like, if I had just known this, I would have saved so much time or energy or whatever, maybe a headache or saved some money, which is super important right now too. What were some of those things, or maybe there's one thing that really sticks out to you?
Um, yeah, we make a lot of mistakes, and we've made
Every entrepreneur ever, right?
yeah. Um, One of the things that I wish I'd really drummed into my head is the fact that what you start with isn't going to be what you grow with,
Mhm.
right? Or what you end up as. The business today is going to change from what the business is in next year, and that's something that you have to grow increasingly comfortable with, right? When we started out, one of the things that we did right was not to look at product development and engineering as being what was going to drive this, right? We started with the fundamental business model and trying to make sure that that worked. But at the same time, we also dumped a ton of resources into, tools and, and other things that we really shouldn't have focused on, right?
Mhm.
Because if we had known that, we would have saved some money and also saved some time, because at this stage, what is most important is being able to validate this. And to validate this, it's really speaking to a lot more people who
Mhm.
are going to end up buying this. They will teach you so much more, but also not being afraid to put out, a not so great version of what you have, right? Because the information that comes through that would have been a lot more important. How we approached the market very early on, what we thought we were going to be to insurers, right, on the continent, ended up not being true, right? But we had to approach them to be able to figure out. And I just look back and think, what if we're gone in that direction and made a lot of decisions based on a lot of the false assumptions in the beginning? We would have wasted a whole lot more time and probably not gotten the kind of traction that we have now. And so knowing that it's always going to evolve and it's going to look different should give us confidence to be able to do a lot more early on and not be afraid of it failing.
Yeah, most definitely. That piece of feedback I think is so important as an entrepreneur, especially exploring an early concept. You'd mentioned this is the third concept that you had brought to Rev One, the third that you had really started to explore. What was that kind of aha moment for you? This is a little off the cusp, but as you were gathering all of this feedback, what was one of those moments where you're like, I think I'm really onto something here. Like this could really work.
I will tell you and give credit to Elio Hammond, who runs he runs 614 podcast. Right, Elio has been a friend for a bit, and actually tonight I'm going to be on his podcast. The interesting thing is we've been at this for a while, and we've been talking about it. But one day he just called me up, like he didn't even shoot a text or anything, and we were on the phone talking. He was like, what are you doing with this? What are you doing with that? And he was asking this question. I was like, wait, hold on. What we're trying to solve isn't how to get people to buy insurance. right? Nobody cares about insurance. What we're really trying to solve is how to help people cover their family, like basically just be there for their families, right? In the most efficient, simplest way possible. And what that meant was that at that aha moment, we realized that what we were building was a lot more than what we were thinking, right? Because people just wanted a way to be able to cover a surgery for a cousin who's back home, right? And not have to go through so many hoops. People wanted a way to be able to trust that when I send that money or whatever I do with that money, one, the hospital is getting it for the same amount that I am being asked, that there is some sort of verification or accountability that I, as the person who's working my butt off, right, can control how much I am spending there, because there's a huge implication on the people who live here. Nobody wants to say they don't trust their family, but everybody knows what the black tack is, right? When we wake up and you get the call at 4 a.m. that says, hey, you know, grandma needs to go to the hospital, I need $200. And you know that rent is due, but now you have this expense that you didn't plan for. How do we make that better? The very same reason why African immigrants living in the US have the lowest retirement rate out of all of the groups, right, at 2%. It's primarily driven by how much support and dependence they have from back home, right? And that was the aha moment to let me know that, you know, we were building something that really transcended just insurance. It's just where we're starting from. But in reality, we're trying to build a platform that connects families across borders. And that is going to change and look different at every step. We just have to be open to it.
Wow. So a simple phone call and organic conversation was really what kind of sprung you forward. That's really exciting. And I feel like we have so many of those every day, a little bit less maybe in COVID world, but it's crazy how just a simple outreach can impact you so much. That's really, really neat. So you've spoken a lot about kind of the social and like being a social entrepreneur and being a social enterprise, and how that's always been kind of core to your mission and so important to you. And Fleri fits right into that, right? You're speaking about all of these different challenges that the African population, expats are facing, and how this directly impacts their livelihood, their ability to care for their families, so much of that. Measuring impact is one of those fundamental things that you have to consider when working with a social enterprise. What does impact mean to you? And in terms of Fleri, how much impact do you think you can have?
Yeah, this is an important part of, you know, what we think about on a daily basis. So much so that our North Star metric is the number of people who've gone in policies, right? Not really the customers, but the number of people who get policies through Fleri. This is primarily because we started this journey to be able to create greater access to care, right? That is always the mission or the impact for us. How many people's lives are better because their families love them, right? And so the way we define it right now is how many people have care who previously would not have had it, right? Because of the myriad of issues that come about, right? We're eliminating the barriers to healthcare for millions of people on the continent, right? A place where 6 million people every year are going to die simply because of a lack of access to better healthcare, right? Better quality healthcare. And then you look at the fact that for every 5,000 people, there's a single doctor. How do we alter that in a fundamental way? Make it possible for more people to be doctors and for more people to be doctors in Africa, right? There are more Nigerian doctors that you find in the state of New York alone. And this is so cliche, right? But if you look at the number of African doctors practicing here, we've all thought about and heard very recently the Gorilla Glue lady. That was a Ghanaian doctor, right? Think of the impact that he would have been having if he was practicing in his own country. But being here, he leads and runs a massive foundation that brings back health to people back home. We want to be able to supercharge that. So impact for us is how many people through our work is able to get access to healthcare. Today, it starts with people who directly have families here. Tomorrow, what it's going to look like is more efficient ways for which nonprofits raising millions of dollars are able to directly get healthcare access to the people they're trying to impact on the ground, right? The next thing is going to look at coming back to that story about the mercy ships, is where we don't have white saviors trying to help Black people in Africa, but where we have the diaspora taking responsibility and using the massive economic power that they've built over years to move forward the continent in healthcare, in infrastructure, in education, in technology, because Africa's next big opportunity, in fact, for all emerging economies, are going to come from the people who took a leap of faith, finding and building lives abroad, bringing back their resources, their talents, and we're starting to see that trend. That wave is the impact that we want to be able to carry forward, and we just want to be the bridge through which they are able to provide that.
Absolutely. We should quote that for eons. I mean, I think it's a huge impact. And, even just off the top of your head, as you talk about being that bridge and starting that trend of, being able to enable all of this change, there's so much that can be, spurred on top of that, and so much grown on top of that too, with everything from education to, more access to food and, so many different things. I think my mind is like boggling at the opportunities that could sit on top of Fleri as it continues to grow and have more impact and further reach. So that's hugely impactful. This is a question that, is a little bit more personal. You just spoke to a little bit about, diversity and how that plays into Fleri. And what does it mean to you to be a diverse entrepreneur?
This is one that I get asked, and I think recently, listening to Topia Wutono, who is the CEO of Calendly, who is one of the most underground founders that you would meet, recently made famous by his valuation, and he talks about this, something that I fundamentally believe in the fact that diverse entrepreneurs are simply entrepreneurs, right? They're just the same as every other colored, entrepreneur. We see a problem, we see a gap, and we see a solution that we're willing to bet our lives on to test, right? And for me, what that means is simply having the space to be able to be myself, to be able to be an entrepreneur, and having a space for more people like me to be able to be just that, right? Not separate spaces where you can be a Black entrepreneur, just a space where all of us can continue to build that. And moving past that is the fact that diversity and being a diverse entrepreneur means that you see problems, opportunities, and solutions in places that people simply can't see because of the gap in their knowledge and experiences, right? I grew up in Ghana, lived there for 17 years before leaving for college, right? My experience is going to boarding school. My experience is, taking early leadership, positions. My experiences from church, family, the way I was raised, right, has impacted the way I see things. Living in Morocco, traveling, and when I lived there, I used to come to the States to visit all the time, right? But continuously living in these two different worlds and through these different cultural settings, right? I have friends who are from so many different countries. I have different conversations. I speak different languages, right? And so what I see and what I experience and the way I look at things is definitely going to be different from the next person. And that isn't wrong or, something that, you have to go figure out. That's just a need that needs to exist in everybody's space. Because what that does is it allows all these people who are around us to be able to see and think about things differently. Because when we have conversations, your mind starts to unlock and see things that you haven't really thought of, right? And that's what diversity in entrepreneurship really means. It's just making more space for different conversations to be had. And then things happen naturally as we constantly discover these questions, opportunities, and then gaps to be able to solve problems.
Yeah, most definitely. That diversity of thought and experience, I think, is something that is so valuable, and it can be underestimated in its power, I think, a lot of times too. So that's really interesting, and thank you for sharing that. I know it can be vulnerable and challenging to be that voice in some conversations, and I just really appreciate that. Going back to Fleri just a smidge, what are you kind of most excited for? I think that we've spoken about so many exciting things, you having such a unique viewpoint and experience, bringing you to working on this opportunity in and of itself, with all that you've accomplished to date already. What's kind of on the horizon that you just are biting at the bits about?
I'm most excited to really start focusing on the product, right? We spent the last year kind of gathering ourselves, bootstrapping, testing things, talking to people, and we have these little hints of where the opportunity is, right? And at this point where we're starting to get more advisors, starting to get money in, starting to get people who are willing to take a bet on the journey, right? But that also means that we're starting to get other people's thoughts, experiences, motivations, passions, all coming together and focused around solving a particular problem for, immigrant families, right? And that's really, really exciting that I get to move beyond myself and experience Flarey through the eyes of other people who are championing this. And that's super amazing for us, right? Because this is where the real work starts, right? This is where we start to get real insight. We start to get real work done. And I'm super excited at what next year's are going to look like.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you think that this kind of took longer than you thought or shorter than you thought? What was your kind of expectation of becoming an entrepreneur, and did anything surprise you along the way?
I think it always feels longer. You know, Contrary to what I hear, it always feels longer when you're in it,
Mhm.
right? We spend a month spinning our wheels because we're facing like payment processing challenges, right? And then it feels like, oh my God, this has been going on forever.
Right.
But you look at, I look at my previous ventures, and this has certainly been different in terms of how quickly we've been able to validate some of these key points early on. So it feels longer to me, but I am very grateful for how far we've been able to go and how fast we've been able to move in the last few months.
Yeah, most definitely. All right, and my last question for you before we switch over to Q&A. What is one piece of advice that you would have for anyone who's thinking about becoming an entrepreneur, wants to make the jump, but is, a little nervous to do so?
Hmm. I'm going to try not to be cynical here because, dealing with the nervousness, I think Elon Musk recently on Clubhouse was quoted as saying, well, if you want to become an entrepreneur and you need reassurance and, you know, goodwill and all of the comfort, then you probably shouldn't do it because it's not for you. What I do want to say to people, who are thinking of starting that idea they've been thinking about, um, just start. To be honest, just start. Take a bet on yourself. Like you deserve that, right? Take a bet on yourself. Whatever happens, you would have become a better person for it, right? And so that's a challenge that I think most people overthink that. Like it's your life. Take a bet on yourself. Trust yourself. You are going to make the mistakes. But most importantly, just go for it, right? That is more important than anything else. And then the other thing that I would ask is the fact that you need to be ready for the depression. Nobody is ever going to understand you um, and the experiences that you're going through as a founder, like yourself. Other founders certainly help, but everybody goes through it. We don't talk about it, but everybody goes through it, and that depression is really real, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy when you're not getting a paycheck and you're not paying yourself and you don't have a job. And everybody that you talk to, the first question they're gonna ask you is, so do you do this full time? Well, guess what? I'm doing this full time, but I'm not eating, or you're depending on the spouse, right, who's taking more of the burden and all of that. But somehow, that is the expectation. And that expectation isn't pretty when you go through it. I think that's something that people need to get comfortable with. and then take a bet on themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so true that I think we look kind of to that future entrepreneur a lot and see the life that they're living, and we forget about that early stage sometimes and how challenging it can be. It can be very lonely and it can be very trying. So I think that's really good advice. Just, you need to bet on yourself, but be prepared for it. Well, thank you so much for all of that vulnerability. I really do want to start to open it up for questions because I know, Sam, you just have such a unique perspective on so much that I want to give time for Q&A. Okay, so strategizing where to go, important ability to iterate, gain feedback. Okay, awesome. So there was one question. What's the best way to help Sam on his mission at this stage in his journey?
We want to build community. So we want to attract as many people to talk to us, refer us to their immigrant friends. I always, say this. I know a bunch of people on LinkedIn, who know a lot of people, because I definitely get it. Hey, I know another person from Ghana. I know another person from South Africa. I know another person. Yeah, this has been like the best time for you to treat Africa as a country. I always say it. Like when someone starts to talk to me, I tell them, well, it's 54 or 56 different countries that is on the continent, right? But for now, I want to meet every African that you know, and that's one of the best ways that we can really expand who we are reaching and talking to.
That's awesome. So yeah, are you guys on social media or have any presence that could be shared as well?
Yes, so Rev1 has all of our handles. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and we're on LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn because it's pretty much the only place I can handle doing social media.
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely click share and connect people in as much as you can. I love that action item. Okay, how did you get over paying for all the legal fees for advice, etc., when going through the whole journey and starting and launching your business, as the cost exceeds the money and the budget for the actual development of the product of the business? Um, and then also someone, Vinay, is interested in connecting as he thinks that he can help with some of the connection pieces. He's worked in Africa and healthcare and biotech, which is awesome. So
Yeah,
yeah,
so Vinay, I'd love to connect with Vinay. Absolutely. How do we pay for the legal fees? Okay. Um,
question.
Pay for it with a lot of my savings, but I will say, and this is a direct plug for Thompson Hines. Thompson Hines is an amazing law firm that happens to partner with Rev1. Um, and they do a lot of work for early entrepreneurs in getting started. They did all of our incorporation. They did a lot of the research, connecting us to giving other people like within insurance that we needed to talk to. And I didn't have money to afford them, but they funded all of it, right? They actually have a very great early stage startup program as a law firm. They also had some of the best lawyers that I personally love. And so that was kind of how we got that. On the local front, I also happened to have a few other friends who were lawyers in Africa, so that really helped. Yeah.
That's really helpful. Yeah, Thompson Hine is really, really helpful in that. And they're always open to having conversations with startups. There are a couple of other questions in the Q&A. What has been your favorite part of Flarey, the whole journey so far? Have you had any shining moments from that?
Shining moment from this has been really going back to Ghana after 6 years, going back to Ghana, seeing Ghana from a different perspective, right? One, it was great seeing my family, but it was also great to go back to the place where you were formed, um, and know that you're doing something, not everything, but you're doing something to kind of change the narrative and the story, right? We hear all of this news about Ghana, Nigeria, and all of these countries. And when you're there, you realize that, everybody is trying to do something, at least most people are. And being able to contribute instead of just criticizing from the diaspora, talking about the politicians and the politics and all of that, right? That was a shining moment for me, that I was connecting with other people making a difference, to think of how we could make a bigger difference. And being able to partner with people on the continent, not just here, right? beats the stereotype of what people define work to be. They're super smart people, lawyers, amazing people. And one of the things that I loved in Ghana was the fact that the majority of the insurance professionals that we work with are women.
Hmm.
I had two daughters. And so for me, that is super important, right? Most of the people leading these companies are women, and they understand it in a whole different light. That was fascinating for me,
Yeah.
right? And it's definitely been a highlight of this work.
Yeah, that's really interesting and kind of surprising to hear, but wonderful to hear at the same time.
Yeah.
Okay, another question that came in. It's certain that insurance is a need. However, in the countries that Fleri is targeting, how helpful are the government policies towards encouraging or imposing insurance?
Um, oof. How do I not get in trouble in this one? Okay. Government policies haven't necessarily been super helpful, right? Hope I'm diplomatic enough. Um, there are definitely things that could change, right? But also things that create opportunities for companies like Fleri. For instance, in Ghana, there's a law that says no premium, no cover. You have 87% of people who live there who work in informal jobs. So they don't have predictable income. That's just known, right? They have a tall list of things that they need, no predictable income. Guess where insurance is going to rank in that, right? Very low. And to add to this, you tell them that for you to get insurance, you actually need to pay 12 months of premium for an event that hasn't happened yet. And so this is the kind of disconnect between the legal side, um, the regulatory framework, and the disconnect with what people really need, the customers. And so you can design products all you want. If people can't pay for them, it doesn't make sense. And it's the reason why insurance penetration on the continent as a whole has been around 3%. Health insurance penetration is super low, at below 1%. It's primarily the reason why our business model is based on this bifurcation of the person who enjoys the benefit, the policyholder, and the policy owner, the person who pays for the benefit. Because if we were to go at this as trying to sell insurance in Ghana, that isn't really going anywhere because you have such a small pool of people, primarily people with formal jobs working for companies like Coca-Cola, Barclays, and the rest of them who are able to afford this. And even then, it's because the employers are paying for this. It's also the primary reason why microinsurance has seen such a proliferation on the continent, because they get it. People need to be able to understand the risk that they're insuring, right, in ways that do not send them into bankruptcy. Right. And so looking at the legal framework and what governments could do, they could do a hell of a lot more, right, to be able to push this forward.
Yeah, a lot of challenges there. Hopefully, with your work and bridging that gap, you can be impactful in that down the road as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There are lots of different companies that have been doing some really fascinating stuff. One of them is Watsi. We love Watsi doing underground work, really funded by a lot of nonprofits and NGOs, but really doing underground work that later on we're going to build to leverage and then spread this across.
That's great to hear. Okay, a couple other questions coming in. This is awesome. So, what is something that you would have done differently knowing what you know now?
Something I would have done differently. One would have focused on even building partnerships a lot earlier, right, than we even did. Two, it would have been focusing on trying to get to market quicker, right, with different layers of what prototypes or MVPs will be. And also spending time just talking to the people we wanted to serve. We definitely could have spent a whole lot more time doing that. So those are the three things, knowing what I know now, that are really fundamental and would have changed things. Yeah.
I'm sure those will keep collecting too. It's always a 2020 vision looking backwards, right?
Yeah.
So here's another one. Really, I like this one a lot. So, looking out 3 to 5 years, do you see the African continent becoming more and more entrepreneurial? After all, Africa has been way ahead of other continents, such as North America, with tapping into microlending and satellite phone services.
This is 100%. And not seeing the continent becoming more and more entrepreneurial. The continent has always been entrepreneurial, right? And I'm saying this based on my personal experiences growing up there, right? My mom, who couldn't go to college, right, when I was a kid, was selling peanut butter, right? She made peanut butter herself, bagged it, and sold around to offices. Today, she owns her own catering business, her own restaurant, right? Ghana has one of the highest level of female entrepreneurship in the world,
Mhm.
right? We have always, as a people, been entrepreneurial. When I say 87% of people are informally employed, they're mostly starting their own businesses, small businesses, micro businesses, but they've always been entrepreneurial. Where Africa is going to is the formalization of ecosystems and technology to be able to scale more of these companies. We're seeing such a boom in fintech companies, right? Because there's a huge amount of people who simply haven't been in the formal system for the longest time. And tapping into those opportunities is going to be huge. So we're going to see different types of entrepreneurs, those who are building on their experiences living abroad, right? Their experiences using the internet, the experiences being exposed to Silicon Valley and Elon Musk, right? And everybody else, right? Their dreams are getting bigger, but even better is the fact that their dreams are getting more achievable. They can not just see it in their mind's eye, but they can see themselves getting it, right? And that's what's going to be really interesting in the next 3 to 5 years, that we'll sit here, we're hiring developers from Nigeria, we're hiring developers from Ghana, right? But they're able to see the vision as clearly and maybe with a better lens, right, than people that we could be employing here who haven't had those gaps and those experiences to be able to tap into.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that point too. I think that we forget about entrepreneurship and just the breadth that it spans. So that's a great point to just call out. Okay, another question. Uh, at the beginning of starting a business, kind of where did you start? How do you recommend starting? Who to contract with? What business strategy to take under your wing? Just kind of that idea of where to start.
Start first by talking to the people that you want to solve the problem for, right? So clearly seeing in your mind what the problem is, right? And it's not going to be refined. Um, and have conversations with the people you want to solve this problem for. That's the best start that you could do, because that insight is going to shape what your solutions to start to look like. It's going to shape your understanding of the job that needs to be done. It's going to shape the understanding of who you need to be talking to gain expertise and advice in the area that they're telling you they need you to focus on, right? And so start from talking to the people you want to serve.
Yeah, that's great advice. Absolutely. Building on that one, this is a great follow up. Chris Webb asked, Sam, your story is so powerful as you spoke about your experience with your grandmother. With that, can you point to any specific moment or what was the spark that made you think I can be the one that tackles this?
A specific moment. So for me, I think that moment was kind of determined a while back, right? And so coming to this point, it was really I've gotten to the point where that initial fear is kind of gone, right? Very early on after college, went to join a bunch of people starting a company, our first social enterprise in Ghana, right? Huge disappointment to my dad. Uh, right? What is the point of speaking all these languages if you weren't going to, you went to business school and you're not going into finance, you're not going to go work for an international bank, right? Or the World Bank. What is the point of that, right? And having to deal with that and overcome that to get to the point where now we're able to have conversations about things, right? Moving from there, starting other businesses that didn't scale and businesses that did well, all in Africa, where you have no access to venture capital. And I'm talking like 8 years ago, right? And then now being in a place like the US. moving from being undocumented to documented, right? Being an immigrant, joining the military, taking on increasing challenges, right? Helps get rid of that fear that you have as a minority, as an immigrant, or all of those things. That by the time we got to Fleri, right? A lot of things have kind of like being formed that I knew that I was the one to do this. And even more so, I knew how to fit the pieces together to be able to do this, right? And now I know how to get people to rally around an idea. It's not about me, right? We've moved from just 3 people to this month, probably going to be taking on maybe 19 people in different capacities being involved in this, right? And so when I look at that aha moment was several years back when I was walking, not knowing how I was going to be paid for my consulting services in Ghana, right? Where it has to be a tangible product, right? And managed to build Porter and Dale, at that time. I think that's when I knew that I was capable of it. And at this point in time, it's just being able to identify the different resources that are more available now.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely a lot of hurdles to overcome to kind of build that confidence up too. And it makes a lot of sense that you're kind of ready to jump into the next big thing. So next question. It's great that you mentioned risk. Africa might not be a well-explored environment as well as developing risk management models are concerned. Do you find yourself having or needing to come up with new models, or are there already existing models working in that space with risk management?
Every piece of advice is situated in the experiences that shape that advice, right? And so I have this unique perspective where I spent most of my time there, and also spent most of my time doing business there. Also spent most of my time working and talking to other people who were starting businesses there before moving here. There isn't a cookie cutter way to approach Africa. That's why the people who will always have the advantage are the people who are on the ground, right? And that's very important to maintain. Exporting frameworks from here to there really wouldn't lead, to much success, because the metrics of success for those frameworks are very different from how things are done over there. And this is something that has been expanded on. There are a lot smarter people like Eric Osiakan who have been doing a lot more work helping people understand this. And so you need to understand on the ground what the issue is that you're solving and what it really is for the people who are there that you're trying to solve it from. There isn't a silver bullet with this one, right? But it is not as crazy as they make it seem. And you really need to travel and go there if you have any interest there, right? And figure it out. So many opportunities, but also so many people who are willing to go out of their way to help you grasp it. We're starting to see a proliferation of a lot of non-African founders starting African companies, right? PJ is one of them, right? They're doing solar systems. Redbird with Patrick Collison, he's over there doing that. You have a ton of company started by American founders who are spending time. I have a friend who's there right now, who's been there since 2015, living in Accra. He's more than a local now, right? Once you get there, you would realize that, it really isn't like the way they're painted on TV, right? And so you have to go there and figure out how to test these different things to figure out what your own framework is going to be.
Yeah, that's great advice. I know we're coming up on the end, but there are 2 other quick questions. Sam, how are you defining the short and long-term goals for Fleri? What metrics do you look at to determine success? Number of enrollees, regions covered? What are you kind of looking at?
All right. In the short term, what we're focused on here from year to year is validating that there is a market here, right? It's really proving beyond our own initial bias and assumptions that Africans living in the diaspora are looking for more efficient ways to be able to support family back home. Over the long term, what we're trying to prove is that we have the solution. And that our solution is not just a solution, but is the solution that is most efficient, is the most affordable, and also is the right solution that is going to solve the problems that we're identifying. And so I look at our short and long term in that way, and then break down from there what the specifics are that we want to be doing. And then the focus on metrics. Our most important metrics right now for traction really is around the number of policies that we're able to push out and get people to purchase, right? Regardless of what the revenue or the margins on those are, right? Because that can always be fixed. And that's what we're really keeping track on. The other is also keeping an eye out for validating the data around what the needs of this market really are, and what we can do to solve them.
Yeah, that's great. And then the last one, this is a bit of a suggestion and a question. Is there a way to collaborate with Google's Project Loon, a balloon-powered internet to cover areas with access to insurance in Africa?
That would have been great, but Project Loon is actually just getting shut down. I think they're winding down in a few months. Mostly, a lot of the people on that have been reassigned. The next thing that we'll have to look at is Elon Musk's, Wi-Fi project. That's what we want to look at as the next one. And clearly, as you can see, all of these different projects, Amazon has theirs. SpaceX also has theirs that they're doing. It's all around increasing access to internet for a group of people millions of people who need to get on the internet. Why? Because the more people we get on the internet, it means that the more storage is going to be required of AWS. It means the more people we're going to get on Facebook. And so they're doing these things for charity. And in the same way for us, it simply means more people who become digitally savvy and allow us to be able to provide more services to them in unique ways. The more people who get on the internet, it means that we skip a few of the more challenges around service delivery in a mobile empowered way, right? It means that we can get information and things like telemedicine, coverage to more people. And so, yeah, there are definitely ways that we want to be able to partner around this, but it increases opportunities for all internet powered businesses.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much. Great insight there as well. Heather, it looks like it's time to pass it back to you.
It is time. I want to thank Sam for all of the great insights, advice, sharing your very personal story. So I was tearing up over here a couple times, very inspired. So thank you so much. And thank you to everyone that joined us as well. We're excited to bring, sorry, my dog. We're excited to bring you Sam's story, and we will be sending out the recording of this afterwards. And look for Sam on LinkedIn. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.